prove that we're still here.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Jones, and this is my informative speech. After World War II ended in 1945, a period of intense United States versus Soviet Union rivalry began, known as the Cold War. By early 1948, Communist Russia had extended their communist influence into Eastern Europe. Countries such as Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and East Germany were all under the influence of the USSR. After Joseph Stalin died in March of 1953, Nikita S. Khrushchev became the next president of the Soviet Union in September of 1953. Khrushchev had eased the terror that Stalin had characterized in his dictatorship and relaxed some of the restrictions on communication, trade, and travel between the East and the West. He also improved the Soviet people's standard of living, as well as the Soviets' relationship between the West. However, most of his other policies failed. Khrushchev was the head of the Communist Party of Russia until 1964, when other communist high rankings overthrew him. Elected as the 35th President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was only 43 years old in the 1960s election. During the 2 years and 10 months in office, until Kennedy was tragically assassinated on November 22, 1963, the Kennedy administration reduced the threat of atomic war, promoted the possibility of sending a U.S. astronaut onto the moon, and the beginning of thawing of the Cold War. One of the most serious incidents between Kennedy and Khrushchev during the Cold War happened in October of 1962, when President John F. Kennedy learned that the Soviet Union had installed missiles in Cuba, located 90 miles away from the coast of Florida. In order to prevent any other missiles being sent into Cuba, Kennedy ordered a blockade or a quarantine of Cuba. During the Cold War, the Soviets and Cuba were allies. When President Kennedy ordered the quarantine, the tensions rose between the United States and the Soviet Union. For about a week, war, and most likely nuclear war, were possible. However, Khrushchev and Kennedy came to an agreement where Khrushchev would remove the missiles from Cuba and Kennedy would then lift the quarantine. The Soviet Union agreed to remove the missiles only if the United States would agree to two of their conditions. One, the United States had to agree to not invade Cuba, and two, the United States had to dismantle their military bases located in Turkey, which was bordered to the USSR. Kennedy and Khrushchev completed their agreement on October 29, 1962. The agreement was kept a secret due to the fact that most American citizens wouldn't have liked the idea that they created such a deal. Therefore, most Americans thought that the Soviet Union removed the missiles due to the threats from the United States. It is believed by most experts that because Americans didn't know of the agreement between the USSR and the United States, that it helped U.S. foreign policy use greater toughness and more threats of force after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Another important event that happened during the Cold War, during the time of Kennedy and Khrushchev, was the treaty banning atomic testing in the atmosphere, outer space, and in underwater. Testing underground, however, was still permitted. The treaty came at a time when the Soviet Union resumed testing of atomic weapons in September of 1961. For nearly 3 years before that, the world had an unofficial agreement that they wouldn't use any nuclear weapons. The United States began testing shortly after the Soviets resumed theirs. However, they conducted theirs underground until April of 1962, when they started testing their atomic weapons in the atmosphere of the Pacific Ocean. In July of 1963, the Soviet Union, United States, and the United Kingdom signed a treaty banning atomic testing besides underground. Many other countries that had no atomic weapons also signed this agreement. In conclusion, the Cold War wasn't technically necessarily a war, but an intense battle and race to further develop technology between the two countries that ended shortly after the World War II and lasted for over 4 decades. While even though the United States President Kennedy and Soviet Union leader Khrushchev didn't deal with each other for a very long period, the event that they dealt with was some of the most common and most known of the